Hello and welcome to the video. This is my first look at some new technology from BetaFPV. Well, it's not new technology, it's actually technology that's been around for a project and has quite a long time. This is the ExpressLRS or ELRS technology from BetaFPV. Now it's available in lots of different versions. There's a 2.4 gig, 868, 915, so you can kind of choose the technology that you want based on a lot of the same chipset stuff that we've seen on the channel before. So things like the RM302 from FlySky, things like the Ghost and others. So this is an interesting thing for BetaFPV to come out with. Now I like BetaFPV anyway, they tend to be a little bit out the box. This is one of my favourite little cameras for flying around in. This, if you're interested, is the Recon 5, one of my favourite quads. And this is the little BetaFPV and Insta360 collaboration that brought this little skeletonized camera. So they're not afraid to kind of do funkier things. So this is one of the first pieces of made for hardware, I guess, that really lowers the bar for ExpressLRS, because up till now you can download the project and you can install it onto lots of different technology. There's loads of things. A lot of people put ExpressLRS or ELRS, I'm not sure quite which is the way you need to say that, onto things like the FlySky R9M technology. Now I'm not a fan of the FlySky R9M, but I've heard lots of people have had good experiences running ELRS on the R9M stuff. The other thing as well is that the price point for this stuff isn't ridiculous either. So as well as lowering the entry point for ExpressLRS so that you don't have to go and flash and update technology you've already got, because you can just buy this stuff now, and there's receivers and there's even flight controllers with the ExpressLRS stuff built in. It's also not particularly expensive. I think the receivers are about £18-ish, the modules about 40-ish, so it isn't ridiculous money. So let me just jump on the bench and very quickly talk about what ExpressLRS or ELRS is if you haven't come across it before, and then talk about my thoughts at the end. Now, from what I've read and seen of the ExpressLRS stuff, I don't know any of the developers myself, but it plans to kind of get the best possible link performance in both speed, latency and range. The 900 megahertz maximum of 200 hertz packet rate supported, so slightly more latency on those longer range systems with 900 megahertz, and at 2.4 gig it's a nice fast 500 hertz speed with custom OpenTX build. Now it runs on CRSF, so the setup feels and smells are very similar to the stuff from TBS, so the Tracer and the Crossfire that I'm a big fan of. But you need a special build of OpenTX to access the very high speeds on these radios at the moment. But I like the fact that more and more vendors seem to be coming out with hardware to specifically to support the ExpressLRS radio protocol. Things like radio transmitters, drones with it built in, receivers of all the different types, antennas, even flight controllers with receivers in as well. And that gives me a lot of confidence, because what that kind of means is that if all this stuff works together, then I'm not tied to one particular manufacturer, and that's really interesting. So I've got in a situation myself where I was running a lot of FlySky AWCST stuff. Look at all those videos on the Tiranas that I have on the channel. And FlySky have kind of abandoned that now and moved on to Access, which has kind of left me up the creek without a paddle if I want to use the inbuilt stuff on there. And they've also, FlySky have gone after other people that have tried to make compatible receivers. So the idea of having a protocol that isn't owned by anybody, but that you could potentially get the module from one person and then get receivers from other people, and so long as you've got all the firmware and all that stuff right, they all talk to each other, just means you shouldn't get in that situation. So first of all, let's have a look at the modules. Now I have a couple of modules here. Interestingly, on the front, worthwhile actually looking at the front, weirdly. LoRa based, of course, and it is 2.4, 915 or 868 megahertz, and as you just saw, you can kind of choose that when you order it. This is the ELRS Nano RF module. This is the 2.4 gig one. So I'll just move things out of the way so we can get in here. So inside we have the small antenna. Grab something to measure it with. To give you an idea of the size, it is about 4.5 millimeters by about 20 millimeters. So nice cute little size to go on the top of your radio. Then we have the actual module itself, which comes with a standard antenna. Sorry for all the crackling and packing this thing. There we go. On the antenna we have a USB C, look like, on the bottom. Again, this is designed for this isn't the full-size RF module. We have a bind button on the back, and pressing and holding that will also change the power levels as well. Now, the Nano TX module will have a packet refresh rate of 2500 or 500 hertz. Output power by this button is 100, 250 or 500 milliwatts. The frequency bands is either 2.4 gig, as I've already said, or it's going to be 915 for FCC or 868 if you're going to be in the EU. Input voltages for this thing, 5 to 12 volts, and it is compatible, which has the Nano module bay, so things like Tango 2, FreeSky X9 lights, the Jumper T light, those kind of things. This is going to slot into the back. In addition, you have a very, very basic user manual that kind of talks about how you set it up and how you configure everything, including doing things like selecting CRSF, which is interesting to see because that's a protocol I know very well from my TBS stuff. And that's the 2.4 one. Let's open the other one, because the other one is, again, it's the Nano RF module, but this one is the 868. So this is the one that's legal here in the EU. So again, the basic module kind of looks the same. Interesting that there aren't any big numbers on it, so that if you do have a couple, I'm going to have to be careful to not get these mixed up. Is there any actual difference between the two modules? No, it doesn't look like it at all. It does actually have it on the written on the module, so that's going to be handy to keep it in with that. And then we have a much bigger antenna. This is kind of more what you'd expect to see on a larger setup, so very similar to some of the antennas that you've seen on other systems using 868 and 915. And interestingly, it actually has 868 printed on it as well. And then we have the cable that goes from one to the other. So those are the actual modules and pieces themselves. There is an awful lot of choice in here for the different receivers that you can access. So we'll come on to that in a moment, but what I have here is the Nano RX 2.4 gig. So this, it weighs about 0.7 of a gram. So very lightweight little thing. Size is 12 by 19 millimeters. Telemetry power is about 20 dB. And let's get all of this out. Is that all of it? Yeah. So we have the cute little antenna, which you'd expect for 2.4. I love these little antennas because it does mean that, that it's so easy to mount vertically on quadcopters or on wings or anything like that. You know, I'm a big fan of these little antennas, particularly with things like the tracer, the TBS tracer that I use already. And then we have the little antenna, the little receiver even, which actually does look very, very similar to some that you may have seen before. Little manual that talks about all the pins and how you set it up. And then you get a little bit of cable and a couple of bits of heat shrink and some pins. Now this receiver, I think it's an IPEX MHF connector, voltage is 5 volts, standard stuff. That is available in lots of different versions. So that is the 868, that is the 2.4 gigahertz, and that again is another 868. So let's open an 868 and compare it with, okay, that's all that stuff. I'll try and keep all this stuff separate again. So again, the receiver looks almost identical. So very tricky just from looking at it. Apart from one has 2.4 written on it, Hopefully the camera's picking that up. And then the antenna, oh interesting, is kind of the same size, almost, but a different colour. I guess they've gone from for a whole divisible of the frequency to get it down to that size, but that's really interesting because that also means that even if you're using one of the lower frequencies, you still have access to a dinky little antenna. That's quite a cute idea. Last thing to have a look at is this thing here. This is the all-in-one flight controller with the ELRS 2.4 gig actually built in. So we have all the mounting hardware and the plugs if you want to solder them on. And then we have the flight controller, USB-C on the side. And then it actually looks more like kind of Whoop style with the arrow at the top. And it has connections, ESCs built in it as well. So this is a great thing for a toothpick style build, particularly as it has got the receiver built in. So all you need with this is a frame and your motors, camera and VTX, and you're in business. That's a really, really cute idea. And that's one of the things that potentially could make this system really take off, is the fact that all these pieces could potentially work together and you can buy the bits from wherever you need them to, and because they're all based on the same project, fingers crossed they'd work together. So for me, this is a really interesting release from BetaFPV, and I'm sure it won't be the last one. I'm sure we'll see lots of other people coming out with technology. I love the fact that having multiple vendors means that potentially you're not going to get stuck where the vendor and protocol that you've invested in, it's on the radios and in receivers, in dozens of models in your fleet, is something you can no longer get, and you have to then look at something else. Hopefully that shouldn't be as much of an issue. Again, the fact it now comes with everything in, so it's more of a plug and play situation, and BetaFPV have their support information all over the packaging, also means that for those of you that don't like the idea of plugging in USB cables, flashing, lots and lots of complexity, then you've also, if it doesn't work, you've got somewhere to go and ask for as well, and the price point isn't ridiculous either. Hopefully the money that's been made off the sale of these things, some of that is being kicked back to the project to keep that alive and healthy so that it continues to be improved and we can continue to take advantage of the new improvements and the developers basically get something back for all their hard work. Now, interestingly, when you look at the comparison charts on some of the pieces, Crossfire is conspicuous by its absence, but what this potentially could do is put a little bit of pressure on some of those other proprietary systems in terms of price point, and that's no bad thing. Having other options in the hobby and having competition is only going to drive more innovation, drive the prices down, which isn't bad. At the moment, with this all being relatively new technology to me, would I trust this on one of my 600, 700, 800 pound wings, you know, the Kaipaina 2s and things like that with GoPros and stuff in it? Not yet. I definitely would still be going for something like a Tracer, a Crossfire, or even a Ghost on those kind of things. But given time and given a little bit more experience and confidence with this, I absolutely can see myself potentially using it on some of the quads that I have and some of the cheap and cheerful wings, some of the experimental stuff that I want to have a go at. And the other thing is, if you wanted to try something like a 915 or an 868 megahertz link to allow you to use something like 2.4 gig FPV, maybe in those places where you're allowed to fly in longer ranges, this is a nice way to do it. So just thought it was interesting to kind of share my thoughts on what this stuff was from BetaFPV. Again, links all down below. I think we're going to be in for an interesting 6 months with this technology as it continues to come out, evolve and mature. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that if you're trying to learn a topic will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.